Hello and welcome. I'm Lee Peterson, the host of the weekly podcast WDcast, which is called WDcast because it's brought to you by WD Partners, also known as Thinkers That Do. And they call themselves Thinkers That Do because they do strategy, design, digital operations to architecture and construction management, the full gamut, and they are at wdpartners.com. The discussions that we have on WDcast revolve around relevant business topics, which is what we're trying to get to. What are the burning platforms of the 21st century and the challenges involved? And as all of you know, there are many. Also, be sure and subscribe to this podcast, which we do on a weekly basis. If you go to the wdpartners.com website and go into the menu, you're going to see down by the icons of all the social media icons. To the far right is an icon for the podcast. Just click on that and you'll be able to subscribe. With me today is Elaine Kleinschmidt. She's the EVP of Strategy and Experience Design for WD Partners. Hello, Elaine.
Hey, Lee. Great to be here.
Yeah, it is, actually. We're here to talk about WD Partners' latest white paper. Elaine led the creation of this endeavor and is the foremost authority on this topic. So we're going to get into depth in that. This idea of the prototype just doesn't work. Is there anything that we're missing on that?
It is definitely a conundrum. Brands want to control the brand experience. They want to control the expression of the brand. We see traditional branded manufacturers, whose traditional, distribution of points of distribution were wholesale channels, to brands that are really doubling down on direct-to-consumer. This desire and this need for consistency of brand presence hasn't gone away. I think what has changed is all the other dynamics around it. So, for example, one of the big initiatives or strategies that our clients and prospective clients are trying to tackle is, what does localization look like? And so inherently, as soon as you open up the dialogue around localization, your brand standards are at play. So how does it look to be a brand in 600 locations, yet quintessentially in Manhattan versus Topeka, Kansas, right? That's a real challenge that the prototype doesn't support.
So what you're suggesting is multiple solutions. That at one point in time in our lives, which seems like yesterday, but was 20 years ago now, we could cookie cut, 1,000 Starbucks, or 1,000 stores, whatever that store name might be, but no more, right? We need multiple solutions.
Right, yeah, I think that's where we see a lot of brands experimenting with different formats. And so, the big shift that we see is, instead of a portfolio, democratically spread across a small, medium, large kind of format store, we're really shifting towards a portfolio of formats where the experience is really layered in strategically. So, in the past, a prototype yields production tasks, right? Rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat in the site adaptation or a remodel process. What we're trying to do, and I think in true kind of thinkers that do kind of style and DNA, as design thinkers, we're bringing that conversation way upstream as a strategic priority at the brand level and at the brand marketing and at the experiential level, to make it a formula that the brand can still guide, but those decisions are now not being made as a tactical choice in an execution process. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the paper, you mentioned the new realities, and you list 6 different things, and maybe we could talk about some of those. Like product innovation, for example, as one of the key essential drivers. Anything you'd like to add about that, about product innovation?
For me, product innovation has so many different expressions, right? Product innovation can be material innovation, especially in the athletic sector. We see innovation around, smart materials. Product innovation can be, one example in the white paper is around an insight from Soma Intimates, for example, where they had this insight that 70 to 80% of women are wearing the wrong size bra, and when you're told that, you're like, oh my gosh, I need to figure that out. But, so they've created tools now to really build that confidence in customers. They're making the right selection and that they're going to be comfortable and that product is going to work for them. Nike is at the forefront right now. I mean, everybody's watching what they're doing, self included. I think we're all enamored by their ability to kind of look forward, think fast,
Customize.
and move. The ability to customize product, to be able to really kind of put your own mark on it and make it yourself, in terms of self-expression and self-branding, it is a really important thing. So I think product innovation in total, is table stakes, right? There's got to be some level of aspirational product to balance out your core assortment and even your mid-tier assortment. But what is that pinnacle or premium assortment that is going to keep people wondering what comes next? And it can't just be a color story for next season.
Levi's too, right? I mean, Levi's opened that store in New York and they did it once before in San Francisco, I think in the late 90s, but timing is everything, and they open up a store now in New York City where they will customize jeans for you. You come in, you get automatically sized, and then they manufacture them right on the spot.
I think the brands that are winning, like the Nikes, arguably the Levi's of the world, I think when you corral all of those names together, I think the common thread is a design sensibility at the core of the brand. I think this need and deep desire for experimentation and willingness to fail, and to iterate. And I think that we see a lot of retailers talking a lot about their testing plans, but really they're testing, they put it out into the market, and then they move off to the next shiny object.
Yeah.
And they abandon the idea because it might not have taken off in the first 3 months, so it wasn't worth it any longer. And I think that this is what the startups are doing right, is that they don't have this need for perfection, which is inherent to an innovation mindset or into a design kind of exploratory mindset.
Well, sort of started by the dot-coms, right? The fail fast mantra, where you're better off trying 20 things and failing at 18 of them because you just came up with 2 big, great ideas.
That could be major unlocks. Yeah, totally.
And another thing that you mentioned is experiential retail, which is sort of a hot button for me because we've been talking about it, I think, for this whole century. In one way, shape, or form or another, and everybody says, well, it's customer experience, about customer experience. And the more I thought about it personally, I thought, well, that's everything.
Right.
I went out on my bike the other day and I had a Rafa customer experience just because I rode my bike.
Right.
But that doesn't mean I'm going to buy anything from Rafa, but that's part of a Rafa experience. So how did you bring that up, or why was it so important to bring up for this paper?
Well, so number one, I think it's important to kind of talk about it because most brands are trying to figure out what experiential means to their brand and to their brand experience. I think it's important because this is where a lot of the testing is being done, and there are anomaly let's go back to the testing thing. There are these anomaly implementations of things in, a 5-store test or a 2-store test or a 1-store flagship. But the Achilles heel really is then how do they scale that? If I have 500 stores or 600 stores, how do I take that to all of my stores, And so that's where, the kit of parts and this kind of portfolio view really starts to kind of meld into that. But it's, in a weird sense, it's kind of like what's old is new. I remember being a little kid and going to Woolworths and with my mom, and just dying to go to that counter and go have lunch, like,
No kidding, right?
You think about galleons years ago. I mean, they were so far ahead of
they were.
themselves.
Yeah,
there was a
climbing
pond
wall.
out back and a climbing wall, and and even you look at like the Cabela's and the Bass Pros. They've been doing this for how long? But it's interesting to me because I think what's old is new. I think the big difference is the technology factor. That's now the underpinning.
Yeah, and the technology was almost the cause of it. You instead of going in and seeing, the same specialty store you saw at home in a different city when you go to a different city, you want to see a specialty store that looks like that city or is more like that city, which brings into play this kit of parts that you're talking about. The kit of parts is not only just materials, but it's everything involved with it.
Yeah, that's exactly where we're headed. I think this approach is relatively new. We have exercised this approach with several clients, and I think that what it does is it brings a cross-functional client team to the table to really figure it out. Whereas, the days of staying in your lane and taking the path of least resistance, of just the baton pass from one group to the next within an organization, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. So that holistic approach up front and having, all disciplines within an organization involved in that conversation is really the way to rally around and build that alignment. I think one thing in retail design that gets lost on a lot of brands, especially those that are kind of immature retailers, if you will, meaning just haven't been at the retail game for a long time, is that a lot of brands will build on an edit point. There's this singular person who's a certain age, who has a certain lifestyle, and there's this aspirational storyline around this person and this edit point kind of target customer, right? And they build brand around that persona. They build product around that persona, and then you open up your doors to a store and everyone but that person is actually walking in the door, right? So I mean, think about that even in context of a metropolitan kind of a flagship store to, a smaller kind of, city that is more of a high street door, to a suburban mall, even if it's an A mall, but then even you can span that across an A mall, B mall, and C mall, and you think about the people actually walking through those doors, and, I don't know what the percentage is, but it by and large is not that person at that hyper edit point.
Well, yeah, how could it be? Judging from one of those customers may have a family, another one may be single and living in the city. I mean, and you have a store in both of those
Right.
places. I mean, it's just not going to be the same.
So that's an exercise that goes together with the kit of parts exercise, which is how do we look at the chain of stores as a portfolio of formats? Let's break it down. We have flagship stores, we have a mall suburban, we have a mall, center city urban, and then we have, let's just say a pop-up format, which, helps with growth or something. We really start to break it down in terms of, okay, who is the primary customer that we serve and what are their needs, but what are the other customers that come into that store and also what are their needs? So we try to broaden the conversation around all types of people and how we can serve them. Granted, I think it's still the right thing to do to build a brand around an edit point and maybe even merchandise to a degree, product development around an edit point. Again, I'll use the athletic sector as a perfect example. If your brand is built around an elite athlete, then be true to that elite athlete and don't get distracted, right? I mean, we saw that. We see that out there, and we see that with the brands trying to figure it out, right? But then what does that look like? How do you appeal to an international customer? What is the nuance between dealing with an urban city dweller versus a suburban parent or a suburban teen versus a rural format? we could take that same conversation, apply it across specialty retail, we could take that across big box retail, we could take that across hardwares and home improvement, we can take that across banking, we can take, so that's the one thing about our business is that we transcend, any specific vertical in the industry, and this formula and this is applicable to, and is almost in a sense a universal toolkit to solve the needs of specific types of products and services for even across industries.
Yeah, I know. So we just recently discovered, or I don't know if it was recently, but in the last year and a half or so, that banks were very much like retailers and that they had the same problems. They had a young customer that wasn't visiting the thousands and thousands of locations that they had. Every location was the same. They trained every person the same, but they had something different to say than different base. And certainly like a rural banking customer has much different needs than an urban banking customer. And I think the bank industry has sort of woke up a little bit, confessed that they have a problem. And it's very much like retail, very, very similar.
Yeah, no different. I mean, how oftenly, do we get clients coming to us saying, help me understand what it means to be a great retailer. Help me in my business think it through the lens of retail.
Automobile industry.
Automobile, fitness, health and wellness. We have a whole practice around health and wellness with the crux of it being the retailization of healthcare, right? And that's a whole separate topic.
I'm a retailer too, right?
Yeah, but just being able to have this retail mindset, I'm fascinated by the tension that's there because specialty retail in particular is suffering right now. But the mindset they deploy around brand and around even metrics. Think about the catalogers of the old days. I mean, how many Victoria's Secret catalogs used to get sent out at any one launch? I mean, multiple versions that were, paginated based on buying preferences, right? So, really what we're trying to do today with all these data scientists and big data is really no different than what the catalogers were doing all along. Just this true understanding of how to move product and how to cross-sell categories to build a greater share of wallet with a customer.
And addressing your customer, versus grouping all customers into one giant ball.
Right, yeah, the segmentation itself, right, yes. I mean, you can't be everything to everyone, we know that. But the trend that we're seeing is, how do I protect, especially with staid retailers, how do I protect my core, which is still so valuable to me, but how do I become attractive to a younger generation? Now we've got two generations that they're trying to figure out. It's like right when we thought, the millennials, and then all of a sudden, it's like, they're already past tense, in a sense, in terms of newness, and then all of a sudden it became Gen Z.
They're having babies.
Yeah, they're families.
Yeah.
They're parents now. They're having families, and I think you definitely can't be everything to everyone, but great brands, have a point of view. They're, they have a, let's just say, not point of view, but they have a mission and they have values that people can connect with. I'm not sure in the past that anybody really cared what a brand really stood for versus what they projected.
Yeah.
And today it's totally flipped.
Yeah, we mentioned 4 or 5 of them earlier, like Everlane, Allbirds. Even somebody like Supreme, they have a mission, but trying to figure out what that is. But the mission is to be as irreverent as possible, I think. And I think they're winning.
It's really powerful too.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, what I love about Supreme? I don't know if you catch these videos on YouTube, but they have these young journalists, these video bloggers, who will essentially stand outside of Supreme as the block is lined up with people, around blocks, and they'll go through and interview, all of the people.
It's
And
great.
I saw one. I forget the one. They asked him, a young kid, a teenager, so what are you in line for? And he's like, well, there's this T-shirt with a graphic on it, and it was hilarious because the person was like, oh, do you know who that person is? He's like, no, I have no clue. So it was like he wanted this coveted T-shirt, but had no idea. It was like a Head and Shoulders kind of graphic of, I believe, a musical artist.
The honesty as well, where they say basically, I saw one of their items and they had a sign on it that says, we feel like we can sell anything to our customer. We feel like our customers are stupid enough to buy anything from us, so we've got this chest here and we're going to charge you thousands of dollars for it, and it's sold right away.
Well, the brick, weren't they? They were selling a brick. At one point, there was a
fire extinguisher.
It was just a brick,
Yeah.
and it had Supreme on it, and it was like $300. I don't remember the price, but it was like, really?
It'll be a fly on the wall for that brainstorm. Why don't we just put a rock out there and see if they'll sell it?
And they did. Can you imagine the shipping charge on a brick?
So different but relevant question, I think, to all of this. I saw that in February, online sales percentage-wise, hit an all-time high for retail. And that is even including what I don't really consider, the type of retail that we're talking about, like gasoline sales and restaurant sales and things like that. But it's still like a very high percentage, which I think plays into the fact that you're not going to have as many stores as you did before. Is that one of the things that might have driven this thought about, well, if instead of 500 stores, we're going to have 100 really great ones, why not make them, more adaptable or more relevant to the customer?
That's definitely part of the equation. As you laid it out, and in addition, the commercial real estate factor. There are numbers out there right now that 50% of all commercial leases are set to expire over the course of the next 5 years. And that's a staggering statistic to me. And to me, what it tells me is that brands who are trying to figure out what is this, what is the brick and mortar proposition, and am I managing a portfolio of formats, based on locale? And if I'm not, and if they think that that's the anecdote to the prototype mentality, then how do they go about it, right? I think with that much real estate at play, I think we're going to see two things happening. Number one, I think we're going to see big box brands in particular experimenting with new formats. There's just an article today, IKEA is opening their first store in Manhattan. You can't pick up an IKEA as it stands today and fit into an urban market in that sense, right? So, rather than having little room vignettes, they have 300 square foot apartment vignettes, right? Which is life in the city. And so, I think that's one thing, is that, brands are genuinely need to consider what are the formats within the overall portfolio, including temporary, including pop-up, including Amazon, including pickup depots. Maybe there's just a small format that is 100% pickup depot. I mean, we see Amazon doing that on college campuses, right?
Yep.
And so, for Amazon, it was kind of like a no-brainer. It's like, oh, college kids can't get packages. We'll just open up a small format. I mean, for a traditional retailer to get to that, it is almost mind-boggling. Like, could we even do that? So I think the real estate piece around formats, and the second piece escaped me, so we'll move on because I know it'll come back.
Okay, so kind of a final question here. So
Sure.
I think everything that we just talked about, including just now, leads you to believe, like, the conundrum that retailers are going through, whether it's real estate and customer and customization, localization, different types of product, different types of prototypes. Where do you think, from your experience, like, where do you think most retailers should start? Like, we have a prioritization list here. What would be number one?
Well, first, I think that I think it's staggering how many brands don't realize they need to revisit their branding, their value proposition, their overall position in a post-digital world. What does it mean to be a brand today? And start there. I think
start at the beginning.
It totally start. Just like check the box on brand first, because if you go downstream and if you go into this portfolio exercise of managing formats and really strategizing what belongs in that kind of box, and if you don't have the brand right, it's going to fall apart. So definitely starting there. I think being really, really true about understanding who these customers are. So I think harnessing all of this big data, really getting a truly kind of a cross-pollinated view of your shoppers. Who are they? Go through that segmentation process, not from a marketing perspective, but from a retail perspective. Who actually comes into this store? I think the other metric that we talk about a lot is, when you speak to the people who own the data, especially the CRM data, and you have them kind of break it down and say, okay, so how many store-only shoppers do you have in your database? How many online-only shoppers do you have in your database? And how many multi-channel shoppers do you have in your database? And usually that multi-channel number is starkly low. Store shoppers are just store shoppers. I think some have migrated into multi-channel shoppers, and that's where you really want to be. Those multi-channel shoppers are, more loyal, and the loyalty shows on an annual basis, right? They come back more often, and they put more in their bag. So that type of loyalty means they trust you. It means you delivered. It means you have things that are meaningful to them, and you can kind of check all the boxes from a total brand perspective on whether or not the brand is succeeding.
And even when they're online, they could shop anywhere, but they're shopping with your brand. Okay, that's going to be it for today. Thank you very much,
Yes,
Elaine.
fun talking.
You've given us all, hopefully, like a lot to think about. And I'd also like to thank WD Partners for making this all possible. It's great to work for a company that gets it and allows people like myself and Elaine to do our thing, actually, and to talk the way that we're speaking here today. Okay, so for reward for everybody that listened to us today, please go to wdpartners.com/podcast to download the paper Defining the 21st Century Store for absolutely free. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you all again soon.